Welcome, everyone, to episode 7 of Making Change. I can't believe this is episode 7.
Oh,
I'm,
yay.
yay!
Yay.
I'm Lisa Mazzonetto. I'm a mental health therapist and addiction specialist.
And I'm Kathy Godfrey, and I like to make the joke every week that I'm not anything. I don't have I'm not licensed, certified, bona fide anything, except I've had a rather what I feel like is an extraordinary journey that has brought me to a place of clarity and freedom. And I get super excited about sharing that with any and everybody who wants to know about it. And I'm super excited today because a beautiful friend of mine that has been doing some work with me for a few months, she'll just talk about that later, but her name is Ava, and I have invited her onto the podcast today as a sort of, as an inspiration, as another pointer, because she has made a really extraordinary transformation in herself and her life by practicing these sorts of perspectives that we talk about on the podcast. And it's been, in my view, really fast. And I want to say 8 or 9 months. It's just been like really fast, the way that she has changed everything that she sees about herself relative to the world, including all the old things that used to trip her up. So Ava, we are super grateful that you're willing to share with us today. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay. So we don't, as usual, and we were just discussing before we started recording, as usual, we don't have a plan. So even though Ava and I work together, we talked about, the logistics of the podcast. We did not discuss any sort of agenda or what I wanted from her. I really just want her to be here, and Lisa and I can share questions as they naturally come up, and Ava can share whatever comes up for her that's relevant to that. So I think that the first thing, it might be really helpful to folks listening if you talk a little bit about the beginning, so to speak, your kind of origin story with this perspective, and you can include whatever you want, and your answer can be as short or long as you would like it to be.
All right. So I was very unhappy for a very long time. And really looked for a lot of ways to not feel unhappy, which led me to a lot of substance abuse and self-harm and thoughts of suicide and things like that. And for a very long time, I thought that was evidence of me, kind of being a screw up. And I see that now as evidence of me very much wanting something else for myself, and that I couldn't figure out quite the direction to go in. But I knew that there was more for me than what I felt like I was being offered. And so when I met Kathy and she had this perspective, I was immediately drawn to that because she just seemed happy all the time. And just
so true.
Yeah, just so deeply at peace. And for someone who felt deeply uncomfortable in her own skin all the time, I looked at Kathy and I was like, that's what I want. Whatever Kathy has going on, that's at least a direction to start in. And I've been very just so, I don't want to say lucky because that's not the right word, but so happy with the way that I've been able to change the way that I see myself and the things that have happened to me and the way that my life looks on a day-to-day basis. I very much thought that I was never going to get out of the patterns that I was in. And I thought that the only way out was for me to die, basically. And that's just not, that couldn't be farther from the truth at this point.
Yeah, I keep wanting to clap my hands and jump around, but as you know, really, can't do that right now. So, but I know on the inside that is exactly what I'm doing. And just to say, while we're on this moment of when you and I met, like in our early days together, something that I noticed about Ava that made me really curious and hopeful about her journey was that she did not mind to ask me the questions that seemed like I would not have any answers for. Like she didn't try to prop me up in any kind of a way, just because she liked me. You know, she was willing to ask me the deepest, darkest, most troublesome questions, and that's really unusual for people to be willing to do that. One, because it's scary to us to ask those kind of questions, because if we've been longing for a different experience and we dare to ask, we dare to speak that, and then there isn't one, we imagine that would just be utterly crushing. Like that would be the ultimate disappointment, like the end.
Yeah.
And so people are resistant to doing that for that reason. Also, I think because they can't see the questions. They become, as we talk about on this podcast, the way that we see ourselves that cause us to think that the only answer is to die. We don't even see what that is. We feel the feeling and it feels mystifying. Like, why am I so deeply unhappy about just being in this world? So I think those are a couple of reasons why I don't typically get the kind of questions that Ava always was willing to ask me, like right from the beginning. And I saw it also as a sign that of what she just said, which is, she was ready and willing to try whatever it was that I had. And
yeah. Well, and I think another thing that made it easy for me to ask you questions was, while I desperately wanted you to like me, I also knew that I couldn't make you like me. It's just nothing. As someone who had gone through various institutions and wanted to be, the best in group therapy or the star of the psych ward or whatever.
right.
There was very much something about you where I was pretty sure that you liked me because you liked everybody, but I couldn't make myself special to you.
Right. Oh, I love that you bring that up, because
Yeah.
that's a hallmark of seeing in this way, is that there is no way for me to feel specialness about anyone. And the reason that that's true is because I see the specialness of everyone. So there can't be one that's special. And it's that thing, that you guys both have heard me say lots, about if you are a once ever expression of God, life source, whatever word you want to use for that greater thing. And because that's true for everyone, there's no way for anybody to be special. Because if everybody's special, that sort of nullifies the concept of being special. And so that's true. And I don't, and I can't like love anyone or understand anyone more than I can another, which doesn't, and this is worth distinguishing too, which doesn't mean that I don't see facts. It means that I see facts very clearly, as do you these days. And so like something that I said about you, about how far and quickly you have come on this journey, so to speak, that's just a fact. That's not because I like you or because I think you're wonderful, although I do, but it has nothing to do with the fact of you. So that's one thing that we could all be freer of, is any desire to be more special than you are, because it's not possible. And at that point, all comparison can go.
Yeah.
So you want to say something about how that's playing out in your life right now, Ava, about like it's how things have equaled out?
There has been, like, one of the first steps that I took that was really meaningful for me was to think about sort of the trauma highlights of my story and the people who were involved, and try to see why they had done the things that they had done, and notice. And once I started seeing it, I couldn't stop seeing it, that it wasn't out of maliciousness or a lack of love for me or the people who were also involved, that some of these things were just inevitable based on how people saw themselves. Like I very much remember, even before we started working together, after my father was arrested when I was 17, and people would say, you know, everything happens for a reason. And they meant like a divine reason. And I always thought, well, of course there's a reason. Like he didn't just wake up one day and decide to commit crime. Like
Right.
he very much had a reason that got him to that place. And it was through that understanding that I was able to sort of lose this fear that I had about certain people. You know, and at some points in my life, I would have called it forgiveness. But the big thing for me was realizing that there was nothing to forgive, because these people hadn't done things to me because it was me. They did whatever they thought was going to make them feel better. And I just happened to be there, which is a very insane concept to a lot of people. But I just walked around with so much fear and so much anger all the time. And then to be able to sort of even out the playing field, where I wasn't scared of, you know, a man who had assaulted me. I wasn't scared of my father. I wasn't scared of my mother anymore. That people just became people. And the people who had been kind to me or who had helped me in some way also just became people, rather than people whose approval and love I very much depended on. Like everyone sort of fell off their pedestal or came up from hell or whatever, and just all kind of evened out, which was a really amazing process, and one that I didn't think was an option for a very long time. I thought my option was what we call forgiveness, rather than an actual understanding of people do whatever they think will make them feel better about themselves.
That is, I'm both speechless and have too many words to say about all of that. Like there really are no words for the excitement that I feel when I hear you speak what I know is true for you right now. Like that, because the traumatic events that you're alluding to, like those are the things that people feel so hopeless about changing. Using all of the best of what they've been offered with all of the best intentions can often leave us in a place of like, okay, I'm getting along in this life, sort of, barely, you know, or it's mine and Lisa's joke, I'm better than I used to be, no matter how much that sucks. Yeah, and my question became, for the longest time in this process, like, why would you settle for that? And, you know, you, Ava, are such an excellent example of why I ask people that, because what if you had settled for,
I don't think I could have. I think that eventually I would have either found what I was looking for, or I would have just run myself into the ground. For someone who has been like in therapy and on medication and in and out of rehabs and psych wards and stuff since I was 16 or so, it became very clear to me at some point that the traditional ways of looking at things were not what I wanted. And while they seemed to be incredibly helpful to a lot of people that I knew, and I met a lot of really lovely people along the way, it was not what I wanted. And I think it was because this idea that the things that had happened to me were permanent and they meant something about me, like my very long list of diagnoses and my very long list of coping mechanisms and whatever. And I got to a point where I just decided that I didn't want to cope. I was not interested in coping. I was not interested in trying to patch things up. If that was my option, I didn't want it. And so I was very determined to find something else. Because it all just felt so like permanent and lifelong, like being in AA, seeing a therapist, being on medication. And when all this started, I was 16. And then when I met you, I was 25.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I have hopefully, maybe many years ahead of me. And if I have to do this for the rest of my life, I don't want to, which many people think is a very selfish opinion. And I was fine with that because I couldn't do it.
Right, right. I say that about this way of seeing sometimes is like, it's most certainly, so when it first found me, I thought I needed to tell everyone all the things that you're saying. And lo and behold, almost no one wanted to hear me. So it's like, uh-oh. So then, I had some more things to see about how I had kind of, I had some ways of seeing myself that applied to this way of seeing also, of like, oh my God, if I see it, I would be like, what a selfish asshole if I didn't like run around telling everybody. And I didn't even know that I still had that. So that was a kind of the last shards of my old identity sort of falling away. But now the way I describe it is what I'm pointing at is for people for whom nothing else has worked, to help them be, or help them find what it is they're looking for, which, like me and you, I know, Ava, that we've talked about this, that we didn't even really know what that was. But we thought, surely to God, this is not it.
Yeah.
Because settling for better than I was just barely tolerable. And it felt like a tremendous amount of work. And like you, I also felt like this is not something I want to do for another 40 years. Dear God, I was tired too. I was just so tired. It seemed like the whole world was exhausting to me. So I have an idea about some things that I would like you to talk about. Just the major things that people get most stirred up about when we are seeing ourselves, from that old place. But first I wanted to just take a breath and Lisa, check in and see if, do you have questions or anything for Ava up to this point?
Well, I think first I just want to say again, thank you so much for doing this with us today. It's so nice to have like a fresh perspective. Not that Kathy's perspective isn't fabulous.
You calling me stale?
No, not at all. Not stale at all. But it's like when I hear you describe this journey of trying to find, doing all the things that typical, the typical expectations of people in recovery, or the typical suggestions of people in recovery, go to therapy, go to rehab, do, medication and all of that traditional kind of path. And hey, I'm all traditional because I'm a therapist, right? So I recognize that is the most common journey for people. And what I love about this with you all is just the hope that people out there who are going through that kind of traditional path and feeling like this isn't working for me, instead of seeing that as an opportunity to just say, fuck it, I'm going back out, there's another way. And I think that's what's really standing out to me in this moment of just feeling excited and hopeful, and just, letting people know that there are so many different ways. And this is one that is powerful and beautiful. And I've seen the results, and, and then just getting to know another person in you, Ava, that's done this journey and had that background of perspective that wasn't working for you. I just really appreciate that. So
thank you. Yeah. And I know that, like, I'm still really close with my she's my AA sponsor in title only at this point, but AA and therapy work for her. She is that's what she wants to do. And it works for her in a way that it really didn't work for me. And there, I think, are a lot of people who don't find the traditional way to be helpful, and they don't see that there's anything else out there. Like everything that they learn is, it works if you work it. And so then when it doesn't work, they think it's their fault.
Right.
there's something else they should be doing. And it's so frustrating, especially if you're already coming into it with a place of the only thing I've ever done well in my whole life is just mess up. And I remember thinking that was so frustrating and so isolating. So it makes me very, like, it is very touching to me that y'all have this podcast that puts out the idea that there is a different way. There's lots of ways. There are as many ways as there are people who are looking for it.
Maybe we should change our podcast to Another Way.
Maybe. I really like that, actually. Another Way. Yeah. Because it is. And so much. I just feel so excited about all of what both of you just said. So let that settle down for a second. So something that I love about this thing that found me is that there's no exception to it. There is nothing that remains outside of it or untransformed by it. Nothing at all. And that to me is part of what I was looking for. Like, I didn't want there to be so many exceptions and so many complications to any sort of approach to being alive, being a human. Like, it all seemed way too complicated. Like, surely it didn't need to be all of that. Like, this is the way things are in this category of your life, but not this one. This is the way things are in that category, but not that other one. And this is so simple. I mean, the way that you see yourself literally creates your experience of everything else. It could not be more simple than that. So cleaning up, so to speak, or just changing even, you don't even have to think of it in terms of cleaning up, but changing how you see yourself changes your experience of everything. And so, Ava, my idea was that I would just throw out some things that people typically struggle with because of the way they see themselves. And then maybe you could just share how you see those things now. Yeah. So how are you seeing, talk a little bit about what, I'm just going to go for the big one first. Just jump right in there.
Yep.
Tell us what your previous experience of love was and what it currently is.
So Kathy and I got on this topic the other day because I was thinking about when is the first time that I felt love. And I realized that I had many memories of, my parents or my family or my friends who were showing me what we think of as love, who loved me. And I realized that they very much do love me, but all of that love is sort of entangled with their story of me or their need to keep me a certain way so they don't have to worry about me. That love between people is what we call love between people is often more dependency. And so when I was thinking about when is the first time that I felt love, I sort of just skipped my family and friends and any sort of love that came from another person. And I thought of this moment when I was 17. My dad had been arrested. My mom was drinking a lot at the time. I was the oldest of 4, and I was terrified out of my mind all the time. And I would sit near my window in my bedroom and look up at the sky, and there was a star there that seemed brighter than everything else. And so every night for quite a while, I would just sit there and look at the star, and it felt so personal, even though I knew it was a star that other people could see and a bunch of science that I don't fully understand and blah, 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 blah. But it was in that moment that I was very sure that I was in the present moment, I guess. At the time, I would have said God, but I had a very small understanding of what God was at that time. But it just seemed to me that this like staring out at the star, I was going to be okay. Like it didn't matter what was going on at all, because the star didn't have a story about me. It had no worries about me. It didn't need me to be any type of way. It didn't care if I was drinking too much or not drinking or, doing my homework or anything. It was just there, and I was there, and I felt so much connection with the universe in those moments in a way that I couldn't describe. Um, but I see things like that all the time now, that are just so personal in a way that I didn't experience before. But it's all just love. Like it just feels like the universe or consciousness or whatever you want to call it is out there just winking at me, going, hello, I'm here for you. And that is such a, oh, the mailman's here, so my dog's about to bark, but it's a much
Okay,
more
that's fine.
powerful experience than relying on someone else to love me. And that's it. Like my parents do love me, even at times that I thought that they didn't. But they also needed things from me. They needed me to be a certain way. And the type of love that I feel from just the world outside of people doesn't need anything. It doesn't care what I'm doing. It doesn't, there's no test of worth at all.
And does that feel, well, I won't suggest words. Is that in any way a fulfillment of the experience of love that you are looking for?
Oh, absolutely. I thought for so long that there were things you had to do in order to be loved. Even when people talk about unconditional love,
Yeah.
most of the time I'm like, that's not what you're doing.
Right.
I mean, if you look at any advice column or just listen to people's gossip or whatever, we're not loving other people unconditionally most of the time. And when I found this love that existed outside of people, I was able to love people in a way that it didn't matter what they were doing or what they thought of me or anything, or their past or their present or their future. That I loved them just because they were there and I was here, and that's all there is.
Wow. I can see why that one came up first, because it really does impact every other experience that you have. I mean, it's such a huge part of the misinformation that we have about being human and about our relationship to ourselves and one another. Yeah. So in the scenario you just described, you and they, all the people in your world, are now free to experience the love that is, instead of concerning yourself with trading it, right? With earning it, with ruining it, with increasing it, or having it go away if a person moves in some way. If they leave being physical, or if they break up with you, or if they move away, that somehow the love you experience decreases. And in what you're describing, that's not possible.
It's not.
And so you don't have to fear it. Yeah.
And if I could just interject like what it feels like to me is freedom, that freedom that we often talk about in the podcast, and just to love without others' expectations of it or of us. That just feels so like, oh, it's so beautiful.
It does feel like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was a moment when I was talking a couple months ago where I had really started to change my perspective. I was estranged from both of my parents for quite a long time. And I was talking to my mom, and she expressed that she was worried that she would do something that would make me leave again. And from where I told her the truth, which is that's not possible. Like there's nowhere for me to go that isn't also where you are. It, and there's nothing that you could do that would make me think anything different about myself at this point. And she paused for a second and then asked me if I'd hit my head.
Welcome to my world, right?
Yeah.
You're either really wonderful or quite crazy. I don't know which.
Yeah.
We'll see. So, okay, so we've touched on love the tiniest bit, but you gave a perfect encapsulation of what it means, what love means from this place that we're seeing from these days. So, and you mentioned something already about your past and about how different that is, but I'm going to ask you to just say a little bit more about that, because it's definitely one of the things that people think they can't be free from because the past has already happened. So you can't change the past, right, Ava? Or can you?
Well, I definitely used to think that you couldn't change the past because that's what we're taught. And that's especially one of the things that I was taught in sort of the traditional rehabilitation view is you trot out your story every time you're in group or every time you meet a new psychiatrist or, whatever. And so I had my story down to a science at that point. And then I've come to a place where I was trying to write my story down the other day and it just kept shifting and moving and I couldn't, I told Kathy this, that the most honest thing that I could say was a bunch of shit happened and now I'm here.
I love that.
But I used to feel so trapped by my story. Even when I was working with Kathy, I would argue with her and say, well, I want a different story. I don't want this one. This one sucks. That's right. I was so mad about it. Because I very much thought that it meant something about me. Like I remember the worst thing that I could remember about being assaulted when I was 16 wasn't the assault itself, I had this idea that I now had to tell everybody that I slept with going forward that I had been assaulted, that I was now damaged goods. And I was so angry about that and felt so trapped. And anytime that I would have to get close to someone, I would have to explain, my family dynamics or whatever. And it just felt like a very small place to be. And so for a long time, I used that story sort of as a way to manipulate people into liking me by feeling bad for me, by trotting out a very tragic Ava, my last name story. And and saying, but look at all the things that I've tried to be a better person. And that's so exhausting. It's so exhausting all the time to set yourself up in a way that you have to constantly earn your own redemption. There is no error for anything else other than I have to be my best at all times, which is impossible. And I've frankly never been very good at it.
Right. Who is? Yeah.
Right.
And I wasn't even good at pretending to be good at it. So that was just doomed from the start. But, I just see things in a way that is so different, in a way that is much more freeing rather than isolating. And I don't feel as connected to my past as I once did. Like I know the stories and I can tell them, but they don't mean the same thing that they used to. I don't tell a tragic story. I tell facts at this point. And I don't have any anger or bitterness or resentment at anyone, including myself, which I never thought that I would get to. And it's all just from so clearly seeing that everyone was acting out of the way that they saw themselves all the time, with no exception, including me. And it's just a story. And I don't feel obligated to share it with anyone, but I also don't feel afraid of it. And I'm just not that interested in it anymore.
I love that. Yes, that really is it, isn't it? I think you
Yeah.
said the other day something like it just went flat.
Yeah. When we were talking about just my past in general, and it was the same thing that happened when I started looking at sort of the people that I was scared of, that everybody just kind of came to the same level.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at my past was the same thing. There wasn't like spikes of scariness or times that I was doing well or whatever. It was just a flat story that didn't mean anything about me.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Wow. That is, I think, going to be so exciting to people for them to hear that.
Mhm.
Because that does seem like those two things, love and the past, seem like the biggest hurdles to feeling the way that we want to feel in our lives, to feel the way we want to feel about being us.
Mhm.
So can you just say a little bit then about what that means, about how do you see the future then?
I don't think about it much, which is very strange for someone who, you know, lived in a place of extreme anxiety for a very long time, where all I did was worry about different scenarios that could happen and then make myself sick over it. But I just don't. Sometimes worries pop up about things, and then I think, okay, well, what would that mean? And it generally doesn't mean anything. Like,
right.
Mm-hmm.
including the really scary things like, you know, what if I got really sick, or someone I love got really sick, or somebody died, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't look around the corner for tragedy in the way that I used to, because it's just not there. Something quote unquote tragic could happen, and it doesn't mean anything about me.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's some freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. Yes. I'm mindful of the time. I know that you could talk, you know, at length about any of these subjects, and you're doing such a fantastic job of giving the full picture in a pretty brief account. You're doing really great. So I want to ask some more about past and future, but there are these other things that I think people would also love to hear you talk about that causes them a lot of heartbreak. And one is sexual / intimate relationships. Like, how do you see those these days?
It's again another thing that I don't think about that often.
Colossal. That is huge. That is so huge for everybody to hear, because everybody is so obsessed with that. All of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it started at some point. We were talking and I said I wanted to be free from worrying about the way that I look, because and I can't remember exactly how the conversation went, but you said something along the lines of, you're using yourself as bait. Like the way you look, you're dressing yourself up as bait in the hopes that someone will come and love you. And that just blew my whole world apart, because I very much recognized that that's what I was doing. But in sort of the same way that I stopped needing people around me to change in order for me to stay there, quote unquote, to be with them. I just became deeply disinterested in hoping that someone would find me special in a romantic or sexual way.
Right.
And it's not an aversion by any means. I just don't think about it. Because I have no strong desire to be special anymore.
So incredible. And so you included a little bit in what you just said about the body, but if you could say a little bit more about how you see the body these days, because obviously that's a huge struggle for people too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I very much used to see that or view my body as kind of a trap. And I didn't like it. And I have a long history of self-harm. So I very much took out whatever I was feeling on my body. And there's a lot of talk in the places that I have been about loving your body. And I was very frustrated by that because I didn't want to love it. I just wanted to not think about it. I didn't care, what it looked like or what it said about me to other people. I just stopped wanting to think about how I was being perceived ever. But now it's not that, I have found this like beautiful grace in my body or whatever. I just don't think about it. It's the body that I have. It's the body that I'm supposed to have because I have it. And it's just a body. Like the things that I used to think made a mark on me, things like sexual assault or, the way that I grew up or anything. I used to think that I was carrying that in my body at all times. And then I was stuck here. And I don't see it that way anymore. It's just a thing that I have, a thing that I am. And sometimes like old thoughts will cross my mind about, I wish that this part of me looked a different way. And then I think about a conversation that we had where you said, like, to what purpose or for what? So anytime I'm like, I wish my stomach looked different, my next thought is, why? For what purpose?
Yes, for what purpose? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I just stop because there is no answer. There is no answer that I want.
Right. Right. One of the things, mammalian things that I love about this way of seeing is that it has nothing to do with faith or belief. It is you using the brilliance that is you, that is God expressing itself. That's a divine quality if we want to use the D word. And that brilliance that you have to look and see what makes sense. And you don't have to ignore anything or leave anything out or fear looking under the bed for the monster that you can't see. There's nothing that you can't just turn your gaze of brilliance on and come to a new understanding of what's actually there. And that's where the freedom is. It's not, I wouldn't even call this a spiritual practice. I think we could only call it that because it seems to produce magic. But it's just being what you are. And there is no such thing as physical and spiritual, human and divine. There's no such thing as those dualities, anyway. Do you want to say a little bit about how you see what you are these days?
I mean, the first thing that you said to me that made me understand in a new way was talking about how we're all just waves in an ocean. And there is nothing in a wave that isn't the ocean. That I am consciousness in a body that's called Ava. And if I think of myself as just Ava, then my world gets very small and very scary. And that happens sometimes still. And then I can find my way back out, for lack of a better term, by knowing that I am all there is. There's nothing here that isn't the ocean or consciousness or God or whatever word you want to use. And that there's just sameness. Like I am the same as everyone I've ever known because we're all God or the ocean or consciousness.
And so where would self-loathing come from, right?
Yeah. It's a good distraction, and, you know, air quotes around good.
Right.
But it doesn't mean anything. Comparing yourself to somebody else doesn't mean anything.
No. I'm waiting for, like, is there something else that causes, Ava, maybe you have something in mind that used to cause you like tremendous suffering and that you thought could never change, something that you haven't mentioned yet? Is there anything?
I really think that changing the way that I viewed my past changed everything else. And just opened a lot of space for me to see newer things. I mean, it just gave me the freedom to not worry about what I needed to do all the time in order to be worthy of being on this planet, which is, I think, a thing that a lot of people, whether or not they can articulate that, deeply fear. I very much used to think that I was some sort of mistake, that
yes,
that I was in line, or that I was in wherever you are before you're born, and there was a class about how to be a person that day.
Right. Oh my God, I love that.
And I
was there with you.
Yeah. I just missed all of the instruction about how to be a person.
Right, we were out together. We missed the class together, even.
Yeah, just playing hooky that day.
You guys must have been at a museum.
Right.
And I thought that that was a very bleak place that I didn't think I would be able to get out of. Especially because I thought the way that I needed to get out of it was to learn how to do things, to learn how to be a person. And instead it was just changing my entire definition of what it means to be a person.
Yeah.
Yeah, just that little thing.
Yeah, which sounded very scary and then was not that hard.
I love that you said that unprompted. Everybody notice I did not in any way lead her to saying that, because that's another thing that's true about this. It's just not hard. It's not hard. The difficult part, if put that in air quotes, if there was such a thing, would be letting go of the fear of what you might find if you let your suffering go. You know, we're so used to the definition of being human as meaning, oh, there's suffering involved in that. That's what this is. And it just 100% does not have to be the case at all. What a crazy idea. Like if you had never heard that before and someone said that to you, you would think they were insane. Like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I came here to suffer. Fuck that. That's the conclusion I came to, which started me on this journey in the first place. I'm like, no, I am not having that. Not having that.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if I would find it to be true, to be honest. I had no idea what I would find when I blew my world up for the millionth time and started looking for something else. I didn't know. I mean, I thought I very definitely thought it was possible that I was just crazy, for sure.
Yes. And I've had the same thought.
Yeah.
Where I must have just been insane. But the other thing about that is that sometimes other people get very angry if you mention that maybe they don't have to suffer, that suffering is absolutely optional.
Oh, addicted to suffering. That's something that is an old term that sometimes in the therapeutic world, we would talk about how people's addiction to suffering, right? This belief that they could do nothing other than suffer. Because, and that belief too, that they don't want to give that up, because what would that mean? What would that mean if I said, or if I walked around in the world, you know, not suffering from anything, and recognizing how terrifying that could be for somebody. And if they could just let go of that fear. right?
Yeah.
To reflect what Kathy was saying. So.
And it's so pervasive, like all of the Facebook memes that are like, you know, life is hard, suck it up, or whatever. Yeah. Which I found to be incredibly unhelpful. All of it. But you know, I had an experience where once I started seeing my family differently, I had people who stopped talking to me because they were angry that I was seeing in a new way, that I had quote unquote forgiven people or forgotten what they had done or any of those things. And I had just seen it in a new way. But just the act of me talking to someone else who, by many people's standards, had deeply not met their quota of what it means to be a good person. That I felt free to do that was very threatening to some people in my life. But there was no other way for me to see at that point.
Say a little bit, you're right on the edge of this, and it reminded me of something that people argue with me about a good bit, which is the whole you can't just live without saying things are right and wrong. There is right and wrong, and you can't just like toss that aside. But tell us, Ava, can you, as it turns out?
In my experience, yes. You know, a lot of the lines that we draw about good things and bad things and good people and bad people are just ways that we make ourselves feel better about who we are. Those people, you know, whatever they've done is bad and they should be punished, and thank God I'm not like that. And it's a way that we just remove ourselves from their humanity. But everybody is a person. Everybody is a person worthy of love, regardless of what they have done. And I don't think it's helpful in any way to assign worth to other humans based on their actions. It doesn't, even if you want people to do better, that's not the way to do it.
Clearly it doesn't work.
Nobody has responded to severe punishment in a way, like they might be acting out of fear and that makes them, you know, quote unquote, act better, but that doesn't help anybody.
Well, and just, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I was going to say, it just perpetuates, like we're in such a polarized world right now, right? It just perpetuates the us and them, the good and bad, the way to see others as different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way.
No, I mean, we're all the same. We're all just acting out of whatever we're scared about.
Right.
And one of my favorite things that Kathy has said was that arguing is just two people standing at different windows and arguing about the view. Like each person's truth is their truth. It might not be what I consider to be like an objective truth, but that's what they see. And telling them that it's not is not going to change what they see.
Right.
Nor how scared they are that you're telling them they should be able to see something different from that very same window than they can see. It's like that's that in itself explains the epidemic of anxiety in this country. Just that constant yelling at each other. You should be able to see something different where you are, but go ahead and try that. Just sit still where you are, everybody who's listening. Just sit still where you are now. See something different. Go. You can't.
What's wrong with you?
Right.
Right. What's wrong with you? You can't see it.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, that's a brilliant point. And I know it's unbelievably getting close to time for us to wrap up, but Ava, I want to ask you a question that some people might be wondering about, and that I get sometimes from brand new clients, which is, do you regret anything? Like, have you lost anything in this process that you long for or that you wish you had lost? I mean, she's laughing.
Sorry, very serious question.
Well, it was for a second. Go ahead.
That was something that I was worried about for a long time, that especially when it comes to morality, that I was somehow going to lose what made me a good person in pursuit of my own freedom. And now that thought is funny to me because the only things that I have lost are things that caused me pain. And it's less like I lost them and more that they just left me at some point. Once I started seeing things in a new way, old ideas or old thoughts that I had just left without me having to tell them to go. They just left. And I was scared that I would be isolated if I saw in a way that other people sometimes don't see. And I have found that to be also untrue, that I am more connected in meaningful ways than I have ever been. And this is what I was looking for. And I'm so glad that I found it. Even like, as Kathy said, it wasn't a hard process. It was very easy, but sometimes it felt very hard and I was in a lot of pain. But those were quick moments, especially compared to the way that I lived before. Moments that I was very easily able to get out of. So I don't feel like I lost anything.
I'm so glad that you could speak to that, because that stops people sometimes, I think, who are interested in this possibility, but I think that they do fear that. So that was brilliantly articulated.
Yeah, and even when I lost some of the people who were threatened by the way that I was seeing, it didn't feel like loss either, because I still loved, like, they're still people, they're still who they are, and I loved them very much. And they didn't have to be talking to me for me to love them. So that didn't feel frightening either. And it didn't feel like anything. It felt like an opportunity to show the ways in which I was free. And that was the most helpful thing that I could do for them.
Wow. I'm so thrilled about every word that you have shared. And I for sure could ask you a million more questions. By the way, this is often how my sessions with Ava go these days, is that I ask her questions and she gets to hear herself know the answer and to see clearly, and to have this, just to stand in this place of understanding. Like there's no better word coming to me these days than that the result of this process is a steady, clear-eyed, loving understanding of all things. Like there's nothing, if we had time, I could just ramble and point Ava in any direction, like a little top. I'd say, how about over here? How about this? How about that? And she would be able to do what she just did, which is the hallmark of seeing in this place, and owning it as her own.
Yeah, this has been like that the fastest hour of my life. And so I'm wondering if we should make this a 2-part series, because I would love to ask some questions too. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Ava. We can talk about that off the air, but
I would love to. So
I would love to just ask like more questions about like practicality and and because of the recovery component, if you were willing to talk about that, I would love to explore how this process has, like, what it's meant to your recovery or sobriety.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but yeah, this has just been so exciting, and thank you so much for being here. And may I just say, I know our listeners can't see. We record, as we've talked about before, we record on Zoom so we can see each other, but then we just upload the audio. But your dog is adorable.
Thank you. He is a little menace sometimes, but
he's so cute.
He's actually been very quiet. He talks a lot more than that when we're in session usually.
I think he has something about you, Kathy. He knows that something. And
he's got stuff to say. Lisa, I thought you were going to comment on Ava's beautiful blue hair and the blue background, because I always tell her it's like having a session with the sky when I have a session with her. It's so beautiful.
Aw, so beautiful. Absolutely.
So thank you again so much, Ava, and we will make that part 2 happen. Maybe we're going to record again in 2 weeks, so we can discuss that when we end recording. And Lisa, do you want to take us out with our usual?
Yes, I'm just like so filled with joy today, and so like I could cry right now. So as we always end our podcast, with all joy all the time, because why settle for anything less?
Yes, yay. Until next
Yay.
time.
Thank you.